welcome everyone to our weekly community Bible study. Today we are going to study about Samuel, who was the last of the judges and was a transition from the time of Israel being a loose confederation of tribes where judges kind of rose up because of their authority or because of their being guided by the Lord, and then Samuel is the one who helps to point out and create the beginning of the kings of Israel, first with Saul and then with David. So this profile in faith is for Thursday, December the 3rd. Amazing, we're already in December. So we're reading from 1 Samuel, and we'll do selections from the chapters 1 through 10. Well, chapter 1 is about Samuel's birth. And it begins by telling about his parents and about him being chosen to serve the Lord. Chapter 1, verse 1. There was a certain man from Ramathaim. I see this is going to challenge my pronunciation of these words. A Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham. And I'm going to skip part of that. He had two wives, Elkanah did. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. And you know from some of our other biblical stories how devastating that was, especially in that time, because that was very important. So verse 3, year after year, Elkanah went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her daughters and sons. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. So she was able to make a double sacrifice. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival, meaning the other wife, kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not even eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Well, it still hurt. Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. Not cutting one's hair was often a sign of a dedication of someone who was clearly just dedicated to the Lord and not to anything else. Hannah kept on praying to the Lord, and Eli, the priest, observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice wasn't heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and so he called out to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I'm a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I've been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. She said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. And she went away, ate something, and was no longer downcast. Early the next morning, they arose and worshiped before the Lord, and then went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." Somehow, asked is similar to the name Samuel. So Hannah dedicates Samuel, and we're skipping. No, we're not. We're going right to the next verse. When her husband Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, "After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always." "Do whatever seems best to you," her husband answered. "Stay here until you've weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word." So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she weaned him. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When the bull had been sacrificed, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, "Pardon me, my lord, as surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord," and he worshiped the Lord there. So Hannah leaves him in the household of Eli, who was the priest, and his sons also were followed after him, although they were not good boys. They, what we have skipped part of in this is about them and how they did not follow a high moral standard. And so Eli was troubled about that. But he had this child who would grow up in the house of the Lord there at Shiloh. This was before Jerusalem was anything but just a small little town. So we're going to skip to chapter 3, which tells about when the Lord calls Samuel. You'll recognize some very important parts of this. Chapter 3. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. So they still had the Ark of the Covenant, which had, of course, the 10 Commandments and some other things in it. And so it was in the tent, house, whatever the shelter was that Eli stayed in. And there was a lamp that would stay lit until some point in the night. So verse 4, the Lord spoke to Samuel, but he didn't know it at first. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me," because he thought Eli was the one who spoke. But Eli said, "I didn't call, go back and lie down." And so he did. Again, the Lord called Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. He was getting ready to, though. The third time, the Lord called his name, Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." Well, in addition to Eli realizing, he's getting interrupted, something's going on here, he realized that it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lay down. And if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" That's Samuel's first lesson. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there. Now, isn't that interesting? Came and stood there. We don't know what that looked like. Calling, as at the other time, Samuel, Samuel. This time Samuel answered, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. At that time I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family from beginning to end." Remember, Eli's sons were not good men, and Eli tolerated them, I guess, was what happens. 13, God is saying, "For I told him I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons blasphemed God, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will not be atoned by sacrifice or offering." Well, that was quite a vision. So Samuel lay down until morning and then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision, but Eli called him and said, "Samuel, my son, here I am." "What was it that he said to you?" Eli asked. "Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide anything from me that he told you." So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Then Eli said, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." So Eli heard about the judgment and what was going to happen. And he didn't say anything else other than, "He is the Lord. Let him do whatever he sees fit." So verse 19, "The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word." So Samuel's growing up, becoming an adult. The Lord's with him. Samuel is seen as a prophet to the people around him because, as it says, his words don't fall to the ground. They are true. They strike clearly when asked a judgment or an opinion, or when he feels like God has given him a message for the people. It is clear and doesn't just fall away. It's important message. Well, now we're going to jump all the way over to chapter 8. There's a number of other things that happen, but we can't cover everything. But in talking some more about Samuel, see, part of what we have with Samuel is a person who was chosen and dedicated by his mother and then by God to serve the Lord always. And so Samuel did that, and Samuel was considered to be quite a prophet. Jewish writers and leaders in later years, when they would look back, would say that he was highly esteemed because God came and spoke to him, and did so in a very personal way, called him by name. He continued to speak to him. And so there was a relationship there that put Samuel on a pedestal in terms of history, similar to Moses and some of the others. So Samuel becomes a prophet in those days. The role of prophet and judge, some of those, there are some differences, but sometimes someone can be labeled with several titles that describe their role in the community or their personality. So, chapter 8, when Samuel grew old, so now we're near the end of his life, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. Oh boy, sons are rambunctious in those days. The name of his firstborn was Joel. The name of his second was Abijah. And they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. Boy, this cycle of good leaders and poor leaders seems to go on and on. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel. They said, "You are old and your sons do not follow your ways." So they were worried about who was going to be their leader. So they said to him, "Appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." Now, there's several things here. First, they are seeing that there are other nations around them that are organized, that are powerful, and that they continue to struggle with. And they see a strong leader and king as an answer to that. At the back of the last page on the study guide, I've got a little bit of a map of what the United Kingdom of Israel looked like shortly after Samuel's time, in the first King Saul and the second King David. And if you'll look around them, there's the Philistines, there's the Edomites, there's Moab and Ammon and the Arameans. And so, the Israelites are like, "We want a king. We need a king. We're not happy about what's going to happen when you leave." So Samuel becomes this transition. So he is respected character. He's been a respected leader. Part of the chapters we've skipped over, he was also helped lead them in battle against some of these other nations. And so they are like, "We want a strong leader. We want a king." Verse 6, "But when they said, 'Give us a king to lead us,' this displeased Samuel. He prayed to the Lord." He didn't have a good feeling about this. The Lord told him, "Listen to all the people are saying. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king." See, it wasn't that the people didn't trust Samuel. They trusted him. They weren't sure who was next. And so instead of trusting the Lord to provide, they were forcing his hand a bit. God says, "As they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt till this day, for generations," stiff-necked, remember, "forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." So the Lord's this is full disclosure. Like if you sign the full disclosure sheet, here are all the possibilities. This is going to be the full disclosure about what it means to have a king. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights." And it's a pretty good list, and it's pretty accurate. Listen to this. "He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots," meaning they'll be the first in battle. The king will be on a chariot, they'll be running. "Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots." So the young men, many of them will be serving the king. "Then he will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will make the best of your fields and vineyards. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and olive groves and give it to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage of wine and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourself will become his slaves. And when that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen. But the Lord will not answer you on that day, meaning you are going to be in this for yourself, because the king will create and demand all of this more and more from them. But the people refused to listen. They said, we want a king. And so Samuel heard it and repeated it to the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them, give them a king. And so Samuel told them, go back to your own town. So then what happens is Samuel is going to come and anyway, it's going to be revealed to him who the next king is. Chapter 9 begins that way. And there is a man named Saul who ends up coming to see Samuel, and God warns him he's the next one. He will be the first king of Israel. Now, the day before Saul came, the Lord revealed it to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I'll send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people of Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I've looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. So when Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, this is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. So Saul comes, he's looking to the seer, meaning Samuel, the one who could help him with this problem. And Samuel invites him to come to this high place and eat with him, and then I'll tell you what you need. And he says, as for the donkeys you lost, Saul hadn't even asked him yet. Don't worry about them. They've been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your whole family line? Saul answered, but am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least? Why do you say such things? Well, God has a habit of picking the least, doesn't he? So Samuel brought Saul into the hall and gave him the best of food. They spent time with him today. And then the next day, they rose about daybreak. And Samuel tells Saul, get ready, I'll send you on your way. And tell your servant to go ahead of us, but stay for a while so God can give you a message from God. Well, Saul was reluctant to do all of this, but God changed Saul's heart, and all these signs were fulfilled that day. And so Saul is the one who became the next king. Samuel had gone out to all the different towns and all, and then when he came to the tribe of Benjamin, then Saul was the one who was chosen and in front of the people. Samuel said, do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among the people. People said, long live the king. Samuel explained again the rights and duties of kingship. He wrote them down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Samuel dismissed the people. So some people said, how can this fellow save us? But guess what? Saul was the next king of Israel. So Samuel was so important in all of this, but Samuel, I think, especially is important because of his character, his faithful service to the Lord, and his intimate relationship with God. May we cultivate our intimate relationship with God and live good and full and moral and upright lives. Well, thank you for this week. Next week, we will talk about King David, who follows Saul. Have a great week. Bye-bye.